So Paul, I'm just going to ask you quickly, why are we doing this? Why is this important to you?
I think, well, in my mind, I've been thinking about this whole idea of the mental health crisis for several years now. It's grown since, I don't know, I think since 2015, it's in the media all the time. And I think it's really important to think about, what does it mean, a mental health crisis? Because I don't think it's about, well, the whole term mental health is inappropriate most of the time. We're not talking about mental processes in the sense of mind and just thinking. We're talking about people's emotional lives, the way they think, feel and fantasize about who they are, what's going on in the world and so on. So mental doesn't fit that. And it's not really about health, because we can't use the same way of thinking about a normal, healthy state of being when we're thinking about people's emotions and emotional life. There's too much movement, but also there's enormous individuality in the way people feel about themselves and feel about the world they're in, and so on. So it's not like a body that is in trouble, you know. It's not like having an illness in the sense of either breaking an arm, having cancer, having diabetes or something like that. Things can't be measured in the same way and they can't be fixed in the same way. So it's about something other than health. You know, it's about how we live with our emotional lives. That's the way I would put it. How do we live with the human condition? Yes, some people have very severe problems, and their lives break down. You know, their capacity to carry on at all breaks down. That's probably the only time when something like a health model kind of fits for a while at least. You might need to prescribe drugs in that situation just to help someone through a really bad period. Even then, I don't think it really fits. So I think the whole idea of a mental health crisis needs unpacking, because to my mind, it's like the climate crisis. It's about the way in which, the way we're living is pushing us to the edge of being able to cope and to survive. Whether it's to do with the environment and, exterminating ourselves in a literal sense, or whether it's about our emotional lives, our inner lives, our relational lives, whether we can cope with the anxiety, the emotional pressures, the isolation that comes out of the kind of individualism of this kind of society we've set up. So I think that all needs unpacking and thinking about at a number of different levels. And for me, it's very much a political question, or it's a question that needs political ways of understanding what's going on and how we might change things for the common good.
Well, it's all linked, isn't it, in terms of the way the system works, the system within which we exist, and how we manage. It's very, very kind of, we work in tandem and we create the world and our own ability to cope in that world in tandem. For me, it's having worked in the National Health Service for over a decade and having seen the impact of the way society is governed in this country is having on regular people and their ability to not only thrive. I think we're quite far away from thriving, but actually just live comfortably and live in a way that we don't feel incredibly unsettled in society for the majority of our working week and our living lives.
On the edge. In many ways.
On the edge. And actually this idea of a common good is important, because it's not just about working people, it's also about the world. As you said, the climate crisis is very linked to the crisis we find within people that we call the mental health crisis, but actually it's a crisis within which it feels as though we are being prevented from existing comfortably. So really, I think what we want to be doing in this series is looking at different parts of why things are not working properly, and actually finding better ways of talking about them. But also being honest and open and really acknowledging the problems, which I think when we talk about a mental health crisis, we're not really acknowledging the real issues. And when we talk about a climate crisis as well, we're not acknowledging the real issues. These are not crises. The crisis is, for lack of a better way of thinking about it, the crisis of capitalism, the crisis of neoliberalism, the crisis of greed, and the crisis that is basically in the way people relate to one another.
Money before people.
Well, exactly. And I think if we refuse to acknowledge the fact that, an example being energy companies are making billions and billions of pounds. However, for whatever reason, they are not being prevented from hiking up prices. Now we have regular people unable to pay for their bills, and actually the people who are struggling the most and having the most pressure put on them are the people who earn the least. And actually people, and you can see this in housing, you can see this in healthcare, you can see this in education. We're going to soon have young people priced out of university. It's only going to be people who either come from an affluent background, really only people who come from an affluent background who are going to be able to afford undergraduate, postgraduate education. That's a really important thing to understand, that many young people are not going to be able to go to university in the next 10 years, 20 years. So that's going to really change the landscape of our future, professionals in society, and even workers, and even artists, and everything else, and even psychologists. It was very difficult for me to train. I come from a family where actually I can be supported financially to an extent, but I struggled to train. I became very unwell because I had to work throughout my training, and I'm relatively comfortable. So I dread to think what other brown or black or people from other marginalised communities, how they're going to manage, because minority groups are assaulted in this way. It's more difficult for us to exist in the world. So I think it's important for us to be really aware of that and open about that, and open about the fact that this mental health crisis is actually because a certain group of people are more interested in making money, as you said, than actually providing resources for the people that they are paid to look after. Yeah.
So when you were talking about the cost of living crisis, the conditions of people's lives, and so on, making that connection with the mental health crisis, I was thinking about. I've become really interested in how a two-tier system has developed in psychotherapy and mental health. In other words, a kind of provision for the relatively wealthy in the private sector, where you can buy therapy at, say, between £50 and £100 a session, and you can get the therapy you want, and it can go on for as long as you want. If you don't have money, then there's the improving access to psychological therapies, which is now called NHS psychological therapies, very short term, only cognitive behavioural therapy. So I think it's really interesting how this two-tier system has developed as part of this very instrumental way of looking at people's so-called mental health. It's basically looking at their lives and how they're feeling about their lives.
Yeah. So basically, if you're rich enough, you can get long-term relational psychotherapy, as we call it. And if you're not rich enough and you rely on the state for healthcare, as a majority of people in this country do, you are resigned to 6 to 12 sessions, often, of a CBT model, which we understand because we've been told that it is evidence-based. But we want to talk about what that really means. We want to talk about the fact that, first of all, we are not affording proper long-term healthcare, mental health care, psychological health care to the majority of people in this country, despite putting so much pressure on regular people. And that's through taxation, that's through suppression of wages, etc. But we are expecting those people to receive the least healthcare and the kind of least quality healthcare. And if you're rich and you have a comfortable life, you get the good stuff.
This is the paradox. The paradox is the government and the media are going on all the time, more and more, about there being a mental health crisis, how terrible it is, how we've got to do something about it, and they are doing the opposite. They're actually withdrawing real care in terms of real relationships, so between therapists and clients, but also throughout the NHS, social services, welfare services. Relationships between people are being reduced to these very instrumental, short-term, utilitarian, actually, kind of relationships. So it's rubbish. It's rubbish. It's a con. It's a kind of paradoxical con, which we see all over the place.
And can I add, actually, that as much as we hear the government talk about mental health, as much as we hear corporations wax lyrical about the importance of mental health, or in the workplace we have mental health days, it's all rather disingenuous when actually our mental health is being assaulted by the system, continuously by the system. And actually these ideas that people are trying to address mental health in the same way as there's a kind of utilization of LGBT issues or other identity issues, you could say, they're basically co-opted by corporations, but actually nobody's really doing anything about it in real terms.
Well, things are getting worse, not better. This is one of the ironies of NHS psychological therapies. IAPT, as it used to be called, started in 2008, 2009. So what is that? So 20 years nearly of the IAPT service, which is supposed to be so wonderful and successful. The incidence, the amount of what's called common mental ill health that IAPT is supposed to be treating has just gone up and up and up. I think the way in which the government is talking about mental health and the way that organisations like IAPT are actually setting about, diagnosing and treating mental health is actually creating mental ill health. It's creating these diagnostic states of mind that people identify with for good reason, because they want an answer or a way of being able to understand and talk to other people about why they're so anxious, upset, can't cope with their lives. But I think that's a huge paradox that's going on. And it's about the individual. It's the individual who's got the problem. Actually, it's the society that's got the problem. And
so what is the common good going to do about that?
Well, I think, to my mind, what we're going to do is we're going to investigate exactly those kinds of issues, what's actually happening with these services. It doesn't take long to find out that they're not really doing very well. And we're going to be looking at alternatives. We're going to be suggesting alternative ways of thinking about people's mental health and what to do about it for the common good, not for capitalism.
We're going to be basically talking about these things openly and honestly, and from a point of really looking into what they really mean, what these terms really mean, what these systems really mean, what these ways of providing healthcare really mean, and the impact that they're actually having on regular people, as opposed to what we are told via this evidence-based way of understanding outcomes that we call outcome measuring. Now, of course, in therapy, it's very difficult to understand the results because there are many different variables. But what we do know, and we can see, as you said, Paul, is the way we're providing healthcare at the moment is really only making people's mental health a little bit worse.
It's also creating a market, a massive market for my well-being, for your well-being, for everyone's well-being.
Well-being industry.
All these products, courses, apps, and so on around well-being. You know, so we're all supposed to have a mental health problem.
But I
This
think
is a modern phenomenon. You're supposed to have a mental health problem if you're a person in this society.
But I think as well, people do have a lot of mental health difficulties,
Yes.
and this well-being market is not addressing them.
No.
It's only kind of glamorizing in a way, and then dealing with it in a very superficial, almost damaging way. But also, I think what we also want to investigate is the way, and we said this already, but this model of CBT is essentially trying to help people feel better about a system that is abusive and not doing what it's supposed to.